Welcome to the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are back once again. And once again, it's not the show that we were hoping to record this week. We were planning to speak with Mounds View Mayor Zach Lindstrom about his recent op-ed in the Star Tribune regarding gun control. Mayor Lindstrom will join us next week instead. But as we planned to record, the news of the horrific assassination of Charlie Kirk broke. We decided to focus the tragic events of yesterday and explore how we arrived at this point in America. As headlines continue to be filled with tragic shootings and escalating threats tied to political discourse, we are taking a step back to explore how we got here and what this moment says about the state of our democracy. We will have no guests and no filter. It's just us. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get into it, we should acknowledge that we are recording this on September 11th, a day that is forever ingrained in our minds and our memories and should always be remembered for the tragedy that happened on that day as well.
You're exactly right. And I was saying before we recorded that last night, I put out a tweet. I'd done probably more praying yesterday than I'd done in recent time, but although I pray every day, and I was hoping that today would be a better day. And then when I was driving one of my kids to school, I realized that it was September 11th, and it's just a day of we have to get through, but it's certainly a day that we need to pause, reflect on those events 24 years ago and where we are today. So thank you for acknowledging that, Becky.
Absolutely. So we're going to start this off how we often do and kind of break down the situation at hand, the facts as we know them. Yesterday, Charlie Kirk was assassinated while speaking on a college campus. This was part of his new tour around the country for college campuses, and he was scheduled actually to be in Minnesota on September 22nd, just in a week here. For those not familiar, I'm sure everybody now is, but Charlie Kirk built his platform on civil discourse. Whether you agreed with his policy stances or principles, I'm sure both of us had many differences than him. His whole premise of everything that he built was to have a good faith effort, to have open debate in a public square. He was one who believed strongly in his own opinions and willing to sit down with anybody to defend them calmly and rationally. And he was also willing to give others the space to say their piece. He is kind of famous for his prove me wrong, right? He would set up a table, sit in a chair, and prove me wrong. And yesterday, while doing just that, his life was taken tragically at the age of 31. So how did you find out about this? Where were you? What was your reaction?
I heard about it on a group text that I was on, and then I misinterpreted the severity and what was captured on film. I'd been up the night before late, and I was changing my contacts, and I read the message and I hope everything's okay. And then a friend called me a few minutes later and warned me not to see what was on social media. And instinctively, I looked over my computer, autoplay was on, and I saw it. And I let him go, and I got sick. I was physically sick yesterday, multiple times throughout the day, by what I saw on social media and what was captured on video. One of the sad realities is that everyone has in their pocket a television production studio. They got a camera, they got a video camera, and they have the ability to broadcast. And we are a very connected society. And sadly, Charlie Kirk's death was captured on video from multiple angles, from multiple people, and it was all over social media. And it was one of the most horrific things I've ever seen. I wish I could unsee it. And again, it physically made me sick. It was just horrific.
Absolutely agree. I got I think Fox News and Politico alert on my phone about it. I was in the middle of a busy work day, during some calls and meetings, and my husband got home and he saw the video and I turned on Twitter and like you saw it and can't unsee it and have it horrifically playing in my brain ever since. When I saw the initial alert, I have to say I kind of thought he was walking down the road and got shot. It didn't click with me that he was in the middle of a speaking event with thousands of people in the middle of an open campus. And oh, it's just horrific. I mean, for so many reasons we will get into. A little bit about he was 31, married with 2 young kids, and built this platform. Again, I'm not saying that I agreed with anything or everything that he stood for, but he shouldn't have been assassinated for any of that, for who he is, for what he believes, for what he stands for. No one should. Left, right, center, indifferent. It was a really, really tragic day and is, I think, the tipping, I don't know if it's the tipping point. It's another piece of the puzzle of this horrific situation we find ourselves in, which I think is what our conversation is largely going to be about today. Before we get into it a little bit, I do just want to kind of walk through a little bit more of Charlie's bio, because it was pretty impressive. He started Turning Point USA in 2012 when he was just 18 years old. He turned it into Turning Point Action, which was a 501c3 designed to target Dems. They acquired Students for Trump in the last couple of years. They had started Turning Point Faith, which was about addressing America's crumbling religious foundations, really trying to give them more civic engagement. And he had a 3-hour talk show every day. I mean, we do an hour podcast once a week, a 3-hour talk show every day. And according to data, it was downloaded between 500,000 and 750 times each day in 2024. Insane. He had a platform, he had a microphone, he had a following, absolutely. And he believed what he believed. And we are at a point right now where folks, we talk about this all the time, right? That we are trying to bring civil discourse back. We are trying to prove that you can disagree without being disagreeable, that we can have conversations, we can have tough conversations, but we can be civil to each other, and we can do these hard things. And it's clear that we're in the minority, and that people think that having a political opinion means that you can and should die. Not all people, obviously, but some.
Yes. When I saw the video, I sent a text to you and like, don't watch it. Part of the reason I sent that was because and I said the same to my kids when they got home. My kids aren't on social media, but all of my kids had heard about it by that point. And the reason why I didn't want, aside from the absolute shock and horrific value, the shock value of what it was, the grotesque, it was one of the worst things I've ever seen on the internet. And to know that he was killed in that way, doing exactly what that in many ways, Becky, we try to do. We try to have conversations with people. Now, I don't want to give any impression that we get the downloads, we have the viewership, or we attract the crowds like Charlie Kirk did. But what Charlie Kirk was trying to do was to have conversations with people and have discussions. And he was killed doing that. He was killed doing that. He was assassinated and killed for doing that. And I want to talk about my kids' reaction for a second. I have teenagers and a wide variety of political views. And the fact that a 31-year-old father of 2, father, son, husband, was killed on a college campus simply for having a discussion with people was really a rough spot yesterday. We will probably say more than once in this episode that we did not agree with Charlie Kirk. I will tell you, I didn't agree with Charlie Kirk. But Charlie Kirk didn't deserve to die. And he certainly didn't deserve to die because of his political views. No one deserves to meet that type of untimely death. But part of what we're trying to do in this episode is discuss it from the standpoint of the circumstances that it happened in. He was having a speech, having a discussion on a college campus, and he was killed during it. And I don't know about your academic career, but my academic career, one of the things that I enjoyed about being on a college campus, the times that I've been on a college campus as a student, that's where I found who I was. I grew up in an apolitical household. I've discussed that before. My parents voted, but we didn't discuss politics. And it was at a college campus I became active in politics, and that I became active in the college Republicans. And as much college campuses are supposed to be a place where there can be ideas discussed, ideas that you disagree with and ideas that you agree with. But to have him struck down at a college campus having that discussion, not engaging in any militant behavior, but having a
Right.
discussion is simply horrific. And as a parent of children who are going to be heading off to college in a few years, I am so concerned about what they're going to be walking into and what the world that they're in right now is going to give back to them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's very chilling. It's hard to have the words to know to describe what this means for where we are right now. It's really hard for me to kind of wrap my head around how we got here. I mean, it's hard and not hard to know how we got here. We've watched it slowly happen. And every time we think that it's the tipping point, we think things will turn around, we think we will get better. And then we move a week, a month beyond a horrific incident and the temperature ramps back up and we hear folks on both sides getting more and more upset and angry and it's just something truly needs to change. One thing I do think is seeing the responses from folks on both sides of the aisle. I think there was kind of a unifying sentiment in a lot of the responses. I want to go through a couple of the ones that
Please
I
do.
saw that I thought were compelling, that were starting with Secretary of State Steve Simon said the shooting of Charlie Kirk is yet another example of horrific politically motivated violence which should have no place in our country. We all have a responsibility to turn the political temperature down where we can. Governor Walz said an open forum for political dialogue and disagreement was upended by a horrific act of targeted violence. In America, we don't settle our differences, violence, or at gunpoint. I'm praying for Charlie, his family, and his young children. Gabby Giffords, who was tragically targeted a number of years ago at an event as well, wrote, I am horrified to hear Charlie Kirk was shot at an event in Utah. Democratic societies will always have political disagreements, but we must never allow America to become a country that confronts those disagreements with violence. She went on in another statement to say, another tweet to say, attacks against political or ideological opponents are cowardly and un-American and must be universally condemned. And then one more was Al Gore, who you just mentioned, said, all of us Americans must condemn the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk in the strongest terms possible. In our nation, acts of political violence are attacks on democracy itself. I urge all Americans to join in commitment to help steer our democracy away from the hatred and hyper-partisan division that have become all too common and steer instead towards open, good faith debate among those whom we disagree. And that one to me is best. It encapsulates, I think, how I feel, how I want to feel, how I want and urge and hope that we can all get there. Skeptical, but want to.
I will tell you that I was impressed and also disgusted at some of the responses that I saw yesterday. And I want to talk a little bit about social media. I think one of the benefits, and not to engage in ageism, but I remember a time before we had the internet. And respectfully, I think you probably do too. Remember a time what it was like. I think you and I are pretty close, and maybe a few people a few years older that are younger than us. are probably coming that last generation of where we weren't tethered to our phones as much as we are now today, and we didn't have the social media presence. I have to say to you that over the last few months, and I should also say, when I was the deputy chair of the Republican Party of Minnesota, I used to give training programs on how to use social media. And I've been a big believer in that social media can be good, and I've tried to get the best out of it. My wife and I have asked, encouraged, and strongly encouraged our kids to not participate and be on social media. And I will say to you, all parents think their kids are perfect. One of the reasons why I think my kids have developed into the people that they are is because they're not on social media. But over the last few months, I have, for the first time in my life, thought that I wanted to get off social media. And the reason why I haven't is because I feel like I'm giving up. And so, but I will tell you, it's a struggle. I tweet and I post on social media less than I ever have before. I launched a Substack back in July, and with the hope of engaging with people in a more thoughtful way. But I will tell you that yesterday is another example of something that I've talked with you about before, of how tragedy social media is the worst. And I am so sick of it. I am not going to name names, but I saw people on both sides of the aisle, people who used to occupy political office at the state and federal level, people that occupy elected office right now, being monsters. It was both sides. It was Republicans and it was Democrats. And the only reason why I'm not naming names is because I don't want to play the tit for tat. I don't want to play the game of, if I mention a Democrat, I have to mention a Republican, or if I mention a Republican, I have to mention a Democrat. You and I could do a 2-hour podcast episode where I cite all the examples of the garbage that I saw on social media on both sides, and people playing this game of trying to take the high road while not. And it is appalling. Becky, I am disgusted by the fact, I am simultaneously disgusted by the fact that you and I have not been able to do a consistent scheduled show for months. But I'm also simultaneously incredibly appreciative of the fact that I have this platform. I said to my family multiple times yesterday, I am so glad I have Becky in my life, and I'm so glad that I have a podcast, because I don't know where I would be today if I didn't have the opportunity to come on and talk to you. Because we didn't sign up for this. When you and I decided to do this podcast a few years ago, this was not on our punch list. But we have developed a platform and a brand that we are trying to make this country and our state better. And I want to talk about that for a second. We were supposed to have the mayor of Mounds View on this episode to talk about an op-ed that he had in the Star Tribune. I want to share a few things with our listeners. We had an episode last week with Brian Strasser. In the aftermath of that episode, I received a lot of feedback from people. And I want to acknowledge the people that reached out to me. I'm not going to name names because I want those conversations to be private. But there were legislators on both sides of the aisle who reached out to offer feedback about the conversation that we had. And I want to thank them for doing that. There were legislators that agreed with us, and there were legislators that thought we should take a little bit more of a different approach. I am so appreciative of the fact that, number one, we have a podcast that people are listening, and people are invested enough in our brand to want to help shape it. And I always want to listen to those conversations. It is our podcast. We get to have on who we want, but this is not, while it's the breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, we're trying to explore conversations and give our listeners something other than just the two of us talking. So I'm incredibly appreciative of the people that voiced an opinion to me. And I want people to know that I read every comment, I read every email, and when people call me on the phone or send me a text, I want to establish the track record that I'm going to listen, be responsive, and I'm going to engage. And to the people that called on both sides of the issue, they will have shaped future episodes because of what they did, and I'm appreciative of it. In fact, they would have shaped the episode that we were scheduled to do today. We're going to have that episode with the mayor on next week, and we may have other episodes. Because the other reaction of yesterday was I had a number of legislators and people, which we can talk about off air, that I think want to be elevated, and we should elevate their voices. I was just a wreck yesterday. I cried more than I ever have. I prayed more than I ever had. I never knew Charlie Kirk. I never met him. I don't think if we sat down, his style wasn't mine. His beliefs weren't my beliefs. And I don't want to speak for you, but I don't think that they were yours either. But he was a human being who wanted to be a part of the discussion, and he had a perspective on his viewpoints, and he wanted to make this country a better place. And he was killed doing something on a larger scale, Becky, that we do all the time. What are we trying to do on this podcast? When we sat down and we started talking about doing this podcast, I was insistent, and we want to have guests. It can't just be you and I talking. It can't just be you and I talking, and we need to bring in guests. Guests that we agree with, guests that we disagree with. But what we were going to do is we were going to create a space where people can disagree and not be disagreeable. We have a really good track record on this podcast, a 100% track record of a guest coming on and willing to come back on again. And that doesn't mean we agree with the guests. I will say, as kind of a homeless Republican, that the vast majority of guests that we have on talking about the Republican Party and brand, I disagree with. But I want to have those discussions because it's important to have those. But this has to change. This has to change. And I will also say that over the past few months, I have been incredibly disappointed with the casual language that some of our elected officials, particularly in Minnesota, have used. I am not going to name names because I'm not going to play the tit for tat game. Because what will happen is someone will say, you mentioned these couple Democrats, but you didn't mention these Republicans. And if I mention these Republicans, then people are going to bring up the Democrats. I'm going to say to you that there is a dehumanization that's going on right now. And it is so entwined and ingrained in our political discussion. It is simply inhumane. I never knew Charlie Kirk. I have never voted for Donald Trump. But sadly, every time there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, I was able to recognize and have compassion for a human being that I agree with on very little, but disagree with a lot. No candidate for office, no person, no politician, or no school kid deserves to be shot and killed in this country. But yesterday was, I think, another example of how the aftermath of Charlie Kirk being shot and then killed brought out the worst in the internet. And it brought the worst out in people. And there is a line that I'm going to connect to some of the rhetoric that I've heard from politicians in this state. We have got to stop dehumanizing people. We have to stop joking and making wisecracks about someone potentially dying or hearing that on the news and waking up one day and wanting that to be the news. Okay? I hope everyone, including my political enemies and my enemies, live long, productive, and healthy lives. One of the most challenging emotions that I deal with is hatred. I don't hate a lot of people. I don't hate a lot of things. I can adequately say I hate the Green Bay Packers. But aside from that, I have a real difficult time with the concept of hate because I don't want to let hate in my heart. And I don't hate a lot of things other than broccoli and the Green Bay Packers. Okay? And probably the color teal. I don't like those things. But I don't use hate is not a motivating factor. Because of the life experiences that I've had, I'm lucky to be alive. I'm lucky to be married. I'm lucky to have kids. I'm lucky to walk. And so I don't have any time for hate. But that doesn't mean I'm not an observer of politics and commentary. And one of the things, Becky, that I've become very good at because of this podcast is listening to people and hearing people more. I believe I'm a better person because of this podcast, but I guarantee you, my friend, I am also a better listener because of this podcast. Because we, at least once a week, if not more, sit across from each other. You talk, I listen, and we respond to each other. And that practice, that skill set has transferred into the rest of my life. I listen more than ever before. And I got to tell you, I've heard some horrible things, horrible jokes, horrible humor come out of the mouths of politicians in this country and particularly in this state. And it has to stop. Every person bears a responsibility for what occurred yesterday. And until we recognize that we all have in some way a responsibility to either contributing to it or to solving it, we are never going to get better. We cannot point fingers anymore. And I'm not going to allow this platform to be used by anyone who doesn't accept that responsibility. We all have a responsibility. And I hope people understand and can read between the lines as to what situations I'm talking about and who I'm talking about. But it has to end. Not next week, not tomorrow. It has to end today. I want there to be a vigorous policy debate in the upcoming next election cycle. I'm a massive advocate for the First Amendment. One of the shows we were planning to discuss prior to there being before the Annunciation school shooting was to talk about the flag. I absolutely disagree with President Trump. As a passionate advocate of the First Amendment, I believe the flag can be burned. That doesn't mean I'm going to do it, but I believe that the best way to combat political speech that you do not like is to speak yourself. It is not to kill people. And I want to end with just a bipartisan call for any elected official on both sides of the aisle to think about what you say. Because it's not just what you're saying, it's who's listening to you and the environment that you are creating. We have got to stop dehumanizing our political opponents and people we disagree with. And every politician, every party officer, every person who hears this episode, I hope does a self-reflection on how they can start talking, how we all can start talking to each other better.
Very well said. Bravo. I mean, so many important points you hit on there that I want to kind of echo, starting with the social media responses of this. All of those statements that I read. Now, I did only read Democrat ones. Republicans had very great ones as well, but I thought it was important. Some of these that were not folks aligned with Charlie Kirk that really did say wonderful things in a unifying way. But almost all of the responses, whether it was Tom Emmer or Mark Kelly, whether it was Al Gore or Eric Trump, the responses underneath, as I didn't go deep into it because I just, my mental health can't take that, but you see it when you click on a tweet. Almost all of the responses were, go F yourself. No, it's your side that's to blame. There's blood on your hands. It's because of you. It's because of your party leader. It's because of, it was not just accepting a tweet or a message for, I agree, we can all feel bad. We can all condemn this violence. We can all agree on this point of moving forward. It was gross. It was really horrific. It was really hard to see. And again, not surprising. I'm with you that social media has its incredible benefits and has its horrific downfalls. And I've said many times, I don't know where the world and social media and technology will be when my children are old enough, but it terrifies me. And so I think what you said just at the end there is really important of where we need to start is with our elected officials, whether you like it or not, they are do have a platform, they are on a pedestal, and they should act as such. They should conduct themselves by knowing whether it's one person, 1,000 people, or millions of folks are seeing and hearing what they are saying and what they believe, whether it's a retweet of something nasty or their own words. People notice. I mean, the amount of tweets and texts that were sent to me of, like you said, I'm sure the same things of legislators saying things over the last 24 hours and weeks, or tweeting them. We all need to do better. And it's just, whether you are a religious individual or a spiritual individual or just believe in vibes in this world, what we put out into society matters. And it just matters. And how it just strikes me that some folks don't believe that, whether it's who's reading or watching or hearing what they're saying, don't you believe in karma and juju and vibes and all of this good thing of some judgment being there at some point in life of who we are and how we conduct ourselves, and want to strive to do better and be better and make things better than what we left them? It's not just about making sure we're making our environment better for the generations to come and, the business world and our economy. It's about making civil society better as well. And it's just bonkers to me that people don't get that. And especially these people in elected office who we know are book smart and brilliant and mean well in so many aspects of their work and their effort and why they're in public service. But come on, people, it's just not okay. At no point in life should we be wishing ill on anybody. We applauding the death of somebody, especially when it's in such a tragic, horrific moment and situation. I want to just speak to a couple other points you said. One being, if we could go back and talk to, me as I was going through, my political science major and being involved in college Republicans, and we started a public current events organization at my college campus, because my biggest thing is just wanting people to be informed. I always would say, you would hear me say then, and I say the same thing now, I'd rather you vote Democrat and be informed and vote than just vote for who I believe because I believe it, right? People who are seeking information, who are seeking conversations, who are seeking both sides of opinions, I think should have access to that. And obviously that's what we try to do here. And I hope that continues. I hope that, young people in particular really go out and seek information and don't just believe everything that comes in front of them. But to do that, we need to have a space for dialogue with people we oppose, would, have platforms like, again, to toot our own horn. I'm going to toot our own horn. We've had great debates with Chair Martin and Chair Han. We've had Will Davis from the DFL and Preya Samsonar from the GOP. We've had folks from different sides of the aisle on this podcast time and time again. And like you said, I don't think that anybody from Lee Finke to Walter Hudson would think that we were disrespectful in the way we conducted our conversations. I think that we have really sought to have those conversations and to try to understand folks from different sides of the world, and that needs to continue. And I hope that it is one of my fears in this sort of assassination and any political violence is that we lose people willing to be vocal and willing to have those conversations because of the threats that come with it and of the fear of the risks that come with that. And I think I kind of want to move through that. And I don't know if you want to now kind of chat through your recent piece. I think it would be maybe a good place to go. And if I can pump you up to get us started, you had an op-ed with Erich Mische in the Star Tribune. And it really resonated with me for a multitude of reasons. As I was prepping this, I often pull out notable lines from op-eds or articles I wrote or that I read. And I think I almost pulled out the entire thing because it was all notable and great. But this was an op-ed this morning in the Star Tribune titled "Mourning Charlie Kirk's Death Isn't Partisan." And then the subhead of it is, "This isn't about politics. It's about whether we can survive as a country if killing each other becomes the endpoint of our disagreements." So before I go through and pull out some of my favorite lines and what really was compelling and striking and why this is so important. I want you to chat about why you and Erich joined together to do this, why you thought this was important, and a little bit through your thought process.
Thank you. Erich was on the podcast when you were on maternity break, and Erich has come out with a new book, Go Fucking Do Something. And for those of you that know Erich Mische, that's the perfect title for a book from Erich Mische, blunt, direct, and to the point. And Erich has been someone that over the years I've connected with more in the aftermath of situations like occurred yesterday. And I reached out to him, and it was because of the following reasons. What I heard when my kids came home and how they were taking it in, not again because of any affinity or support of Charlie Kirk's positions. They may have liked him, one of them may have liked him more or less, but it's the fact that he was on a college campus, a young adult, 31 years old, wife and young kids, dead. And it was also clear to me that because it was Charlie Kirk and because of how well known, respected, and revered he is on the conservative side, on the center right of politics, that this was going to cause a reaction. And I imparted with Erich as he was on a plane and we were texting and communicating that we needed to speak up and offer a perspective on why we needed to just get off this merry-go-round and how we needed to be more productive. I was also sharing with him what I saw on social media and the ugliness that I saw. And I also want to talk a little bit about something. Again, I'm not trying to put myself at Charlie Kirk's level or what we do on this podcast at Charlie Kirk's level, but all politics is local. Last year, IB was a Republican for Harris and Walz. And over the last year, I have received a tremendous amount of threats on an incredibly regular basis. And there is an ongoing investigation into an arson at my house a few months ago that police are actively investigating. There have been other incidents that I haven't discussed on air, but I will say to you that I think that this is the most dangerous time that I've ever lived in. I have never feared for my safety more than I do today, in light of all the things that I've experienced, some of which I've shared on air and some of which I've not. My family knows how I feel, and I have one of two options. We can shut down this podcast. I can shut down social media. I can be a hermit, maybe be safe, maybe not, but I would be giving up on this great experiment, which is the United States of America and democracy, and I refuse to do it. And so my reaction was to try to get to work with Erich, and we got this op-ed drafted. Erich has been a Democrat, Republican, but what I respect about Erich is he is someone who I want to be when I grow up. He's years older than me, but he is still in the fight and he's cutting through the bullshit. And the point of this op-ed was to get through the bullshit, have Erich and I also accept some culpability, but get to a point where we can start working together. And I think as someone who has had to give a lot of apologies, one of the things that's important when you want to engage people and is to own a little bit of your responsibility. And that was important for Erich and I to do in this op-ed.
That was one of the parts that I really resonated with. I too spent a decade in political communications, a lot of that being on the campaign side, working for some statewide congressional campaigns for the state party, and slung a lot of mud and said some things that at the time it's my job. The other side's doing it, so I have to do it too, which at the time that was what I was hired to do. But I do feel a decent amount of guilt for that. And I think I've talked about that a little bit on this, about some of that. You wrote in here, in our heyday, we helped fuel the very poison that now infects our politics. We shouted when we should have listened, chose wins over wisdom, and treated opponents as enemies rather than the fellow citizens. If we could turn back the clock, we would, not to relive old battles, but fight them differently. We failed in our obligation to be better stewards of the great American experiment, and for that we carry both regret and responsibility. And I think it is a good place because you know that, if you kind of skipped over that and went straight to the so what do we do, folks would be like, well, but I think it can be both. I think we can recognize that we may have played a role in this, and we did things in our past that ramped up the temperature, slung a lot of mud against people who disagreed with us, our opponents, or our candidates, our policies and opinions. But it's a lot different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And there is a forward looking component of this that we really do need to have. Another one that you mentioned in here, is we kind of chatted about, but I want to kind of give a little bit more point to, is if your first instinct was anything other than sorrow and outrage, then something in you has been broken by this culture war we've allowed to metastasize. Talk to us about a little bit more about that.
Well, I can give some examples. I mean, my partisan time frame didn't match up when my kids were in their formative years. And so they don't remember when I was the deputy chair or running Minnesota Democrats Exposed or throwing more partisan bombs or working on partisan campaigns. And over the course of their upbringing, I have been honest and candid that I don't support Donald Trump. I didn't vote for him. But in our household, we tried to cultivate an idea of civic responsibility, raise our children's civic IQ. We watched Democrat debates, Republican debates, and just overall tried to raise their civic IQ. What's important in this situation is recognizing that you can separate the human from the policy. When I was supporting Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 election, Donald Trump was nearly assassinated, nearly killed multiple times. And we had the ability, Becky, to do a show on that and talk about the human component of who he was as a person. We have lost that. We have lost the ability. I remember even in my most partisan day, I saw Paul Wellstone and the people on that plane the day they died. I remember crying and praying in my office along with other Republicans at party headquarters when Wellstone died. There is something that we have lost in society. And I saw polling today, we can talk about on future episodes, where it's becoming more acceptable in this day and age for violence to be an answer in response to political thought and disagreement that you have. I got to tell you something. We've had a lot of passionate debates on this podcast. I've never thought of shooting you or shooting one of our guests.
Thanks.
Okay? I haven't. And I don't think in those terms because I believe the fabric that holds us together is we are Americans and we believe in this experiment called the United States of America and democracy. I stand by the position that we are the best country in the world and we have the best to offer. And if you are an American citizen, if you are someone who is able to partake in the beauty and grandeur of this country, you have won the lottery because this is an amazing place to live. But right now, I simultaneously know that's the place where I want to be. That's not where we live. I will say to you again, I've never been more fearful for my personal security because of the events of the last few months. I've never been more concerned about the safety and welfare of my children than I have been because of the last few months. I've never worried about my family more, their personal safety, than I ever have before. My wife, my kids, all my family members. And Becky, I think about us doing this podcast. I think about your husband, your children, what you have to experience. Okay, when there has been, unfortunately, situations at my house, I have got to notify you because we don't know the context of what they're happening and where they are. And as much as I want to believe it's a random teenager or some random kid who is playing a game of truth or dare or some game like that, and they got old man Brodkorb's house, I don't know that that's it. And so, despite all of that, I can't live in a world of fear, and we've got to humanize people. And humanizing people, I think, begins at home. And talking about people in that way begins at home. And letting that chance, and that's where this all starts. Our social media platforms If you have 5 subscribers or 100,000 subscribers, those people have signed up to hear what you have to say. And you have a responsibility to communicate with them. And when you communicate with them, if you're dehumanizing them as people, that's going to carry an echo. And that's where I think we all have this responsibility. I honestly do.
As a parent, we obviously are trying to teach our kids all sorts of things. We have books that talk about all different shapes of bodies and how they're all okay, and how there's one that's about this little boy with curly red hair, and this little girl wearing glasses, and this little boy in a wheelchair, and all of the different shapes and forms and abilities and disabilities that folks can come in. And it's just moving now into different ideas that people have and how that's also okay. It seems like it should be second nature, and unfortunately it's not. And so, definitely is something that you do have to start at teaching at home, and something that we'll have to start, incorporating in our lives as our children start to understand a little bit more. Because the dehumanization is insane, that we cannot, that folks celebrate the death of somebody and don't understand that this was a 31-year-old who had his whole life in front of him, who had a beautiful wife and 2 beautiful children, who never get to see him again. Horrific. You wrote in the op-ed that this is not about politics, this is about people, and the basic idea that we should be able to disagree without dying for it. It is a basic idea, and it seems so foreign for so many people. I appreciate that you also don't just rail against where we are, but you propose some possible solutions of what we do now. And I want to kind of chat into that in our remaining time of where we go from here, some of the concerns and that currently exist, and how we can hopefully start to do better. In the op-ed with Erich, you write, so what do? We stop feeding the outrage machine. We stop treating social media like a substitute for civic duty. We stop dehumanizing our opponents and start humanizing ourselves. We do something real, tangible, local, kind, brave. We volunteer, we speak thoughtfully, we grieve with compassion, we show up. You remind folks that when the Hortman children spoke after their mother and father were killed, they didn't ask for revenge. They asked us to bake a cake, walk a dog, help a neighbor, choose empathy, choose action, choose life. And that choice still stands. Gives me little goosebumps and warm and fuzzies, because it can be so simple, right? It can be just scrolling past something on social media instead of making a comment, or choosing to walk away from a conversation if you're getting riled up. It can be choosing to bake cookies for your neighbor and, open the door for somebody. It's amazing that the basic kindness that falls by the wayside sometimes, but when it happens to you, when somebody holds the door open for you or gives you an extra little smile or makes a comment about my adorable children, how much that can change our days and our weeks. And how doing that and more, and just remembering that we're all out here trying to provide for our families and be successful and make tomorrow better than today. It takes all of us to seek together, to bind together, to try to do that. But we need to.
We absolutely do. In response to some of the tweets that I put out yesterday, and I would encourage people to go see them, I received death threats. I had people responding to me in vicious ways that I had to report those and block those and hide those replies. That is far too common of occurrence. And if I'm getting them on those days, I can't imagine what people are getting. Elected officials. I have spoken to so many elected officials on both sides of the aisle who are just, and it's one of the things that we talked about in the aftermath of Hortman, Speaker Emeritus Hortman and her husband and her dog being killed, and the attacks on the Hoffmans, is that the nature and the tone of politics these days are going to drive good people out. That is what's going to happen if we don't change this. And we have to be honest with you, I'm going to discriminate more And what I mean by that is I'm not going to platform in any way, shape, or form the people that are continuing to do this stuff. If you are an elected official who has not responded to the events of the last few months in a productive way, and you don't hear this call to change and you think you can operate the same way it is, that's wonderful. You're not going to get platformed by me. I'm not going to promote your brand. I'm not going to advocate for you. And what I think needs to happen more is that we need to do that. We need to rally around those and platform those and embrace those who accept this tone, who accept this change. It has to happen. I wanted to, my last night after I wrote this op-ed, I wanted to have people over in my driveway and just talk and just be civil. Those are the types of things we need to start doing, Becky. We need to start talking to people, getting off social media and talking to people. I benefit from some ground rules that I had when I first was on social media, which is I'm never going to say something on social media that I wouldn't say to someone in their face. So I'm fortunate that way. But I still read replies and I still get the hate that I get. And it is and when you see the events of yesterday, it's not unreasonable for someone to think this can happen to me. And we all have to do a better job of doing a better job. And we all have a voice. We have a voice on this podcast, and there are people who have louder voices that need to speak up. But I'm going to tell you something. If I'm going to be, to steal a line from, I think, an Austin Powers movie, if I'm going to be intolerant of anything, I'm going to be intolerant of people who are intolerant. I'm not going to tolerate it. I'm not going to platform. It doesn't mean I'm going to spar on Twitter with them, but I'm not going to do anything to reward people right now who are not willing to be part of the conversation. And as much as I didn't want this episode to be about this, we had other things to discuss, which is the tragic shooting at Annunciation School and Church and the other events. Going forward, I think that we're going to have to do more to really seek out voices that we know want to be a part of the conversation, that we can elevate, because I honestly believe that the loudest voices right now do not represent where the majority of people are. And I'm going to lean into my little bit of it's the silent majority. I think there are a lot of people that we need to pull up and speak out and elevate so their voices are heard and so that we are showcasing what it does. Because one of the things that Erich and I wrote was not feeding the outrage machine. Becky, when you and I sat down and were talking about doing this podcast, we specifically said we were not going to have that type of podcast. We were not going to invite people on and have the be screaming matches. Now, that's a great way to grow a podcast. It is. It's a great way to grow a podcast. If we, and I know it as the former author of Minnesota Democrats Exposed, I know that that's a way to get clicks, but you wouldn't feel good about it and I wouldn't feel good about it, and we wouldn't be contributing something that we can be proud of. My kids are old enough to know and listen to every word that I say and can read. Your kids will read soon, okay? And they're going to know what their mom contributed to this discussion. At some point, they're going to be old enough to hear this stuff. And I'm thinking about your kids, and I'm certainly thinking about the audience of my kids. And we just all have that collective responsibility. Now, that being said, your son that's a Packers fan is probably going to hear some things that I've said about him. And by the way, I stand by that criticism. And I look forward to the day where he's old enough to hear it.
It's Packers. Packers play today. My youngest is wearing a Packers shirt today. So yeah, it's the way it goes. But you're right. I mean, I think a few things. We have had the incredible opportunity to interview many fantastic guests and probably could have some really good opportunities to ask some really gotcha questions and that sort of thing, and that's just not what we've been interested in doing. And you said we'd probably have a bigger reach, bigger audience, and but we've also stood by we want this to be fun. And while topics like today are not necessarily fun. We want this to be what we want it to be. And I think we've done a decent job at that. And the last thing I want to end with is just your point of social media, which I think is just a good reminder for all is if you're not willing to say it out loud, if you're not willing to say it to somebody's face, you shouldn't tweet it or post it on social media or send it to anybody. And I think I would challenge, some of our elected officials and candidates about the same. If you would not feel comfortable standing up at the dais and standing at your desk on the House or Senate floor or in whatever office you hold and reading the things that you have retweeted or quotes that have been pulled from a speech that you were not expecting to be broadcast everywhere or whatever the circumstance might be. If you're not comfortable being asked about those things by the press, by constituents, and you want to spin and walk away, you shouldn't be saying them. And again, just a reminder of that, well, like you said, whether it's 5 or 5 million, folks are looking to you and watching and listening. So do better. And that goes for me and you, and that goes for anybody in the political realm in any capacity. I have friends that even come to me and say, let's chat about this and want to get into it. I think we just need to watch what we're saying and say things in a way that is based in fact and evidence and what we believe. And it's okay to say, I disagree with you. I want to be done with this conversation. I don't think this is productive. Let's move on. It's okay to have those conversations. It's okay to say that and move on if you feel it escalating. But at the end of the day, let's be kind. Let's bake a cake for our neighbor. Let's hold the door open. Let's teach our children that it's okay to have friends with red curly hair and with glasses or braces or in a wheelchair. And it's okay to be civil with folks on the different side of the aisle or who believe different things on one policy or another. We can all live together, and we should all do better at tamping down when we hear other people disagreeing and raising that temperature, because we need to live in a society where you do not get killed or targeted with any sort of violence because of who you are, what you believe, and what you say.
Bravo, said. And I think you and I can talk off air, but we've got I think some pretty unique opportunities in the next few weeks to do some special episodes. And I look forward to those happening because I've had some good conversations with some people offline who I think are really, we should be elevating. I look forward to those discussions. Okay.
Fantastic.
Now, you just mentioned online behavior commentary. And I wanted just to maybe have a conversation. Last week was the first weekend in fantasy football. And you were pretty hard. Your commentary and I just wanted to see if, in light of what you just said, if you stand by some of those things that you did in response to what I thought were sensible, thoughtful posts that I put out. Maybe others will disagree, but boy, you really came swinging at me.
Did I? Or did I react to your actions?
I don't know, but I just want to give you the opportunity to just do a little soul searching on air here and just see if you think that those landed the way you wanted them to.
I think it did land the way. Anytime I can have a Stifler, gif and
Yes.
about it's on like Donkey Kong. I mean, come
Yes.
on.
That was
I'm going to
good.
utilize that opportunity at any given moment.
You should give the standings where I think we have a who's in the lead. I think it's
I'm
uh,
pulling it up
I
right
think our
now. Is it?
colleague Mike Zipko is in the lead.
I think you're right. It is Mike Zipko in the lead. I think I am tied with your wife
Oh, I tell you.
in second.
Yes.
And I think you're down there tied for, tied for fourth.
That's not bad. It's
It's
week
not bad.
one. And again, I'm coming. I want to note, send a special message on my family fantasy football league that my arch nemesis in my family, my niece Lindsay, I did beat her, and I had Josh Allen on Sunday night, and it was a slow, methodical win. I came back quite extensively, and I'm
Like those
really
Vikings.
and I really set the tone. I really set the tone in fantasy football. Dominated in week one against family member. I'm still in the hunt in this temporary lead that you have, that my wife has. I certainly hope there's no collusion going on.
Never.
But we'll have to see about that. But I'm coming, and then the Vikings won on Monday night. I
Ooh,
watched the
that's
game.
brutal.
I watched the game with a well-known Chicago Bears fan, and they were really, really cocky at the start of the night, and boy, they left in shame. It was a beautiful night. I will be at US Bank Stadium on Sunday night for the Vikings versus the Atlanta Falcons, and
Exciting.
I'm going to be pumped and excited. But most of all, I want to just say thank you again for being a friend, someone I respect, and whose voice I desperately needed to hear today.
Thank
But
you
not
as
about
well.
football.
And thank you for writing the op-ed. We'll be back next week. Yeah, we'll be back next week. Hopefully, a little, uh, not as I don't even know, not as depressing of a day, upsetting. I pray and hope we don't have another tragic incident. It's been a rough go at it here.
It has been. But I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us for this latest episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at BB BreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Stay safe. Take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.